welcome to our webinar. It's fantastic to see so many of you have joined. What I'll do is I'll just lead off with a very quick introduction and provide an overview of the webinar, and then we'll go from there. I'll just provide you a very brief overview of context-led learning, and which will lead into a bit of an overview at our education program here at Cosmos magazine, which is called Cosmos for Schools, which will lead into a demonstration of our science lessons, which use the aforementioned context as its base pedagogy. And then there'll just be a short wrap up at the end with a Q&A session. Overall, it's probably about 10 to 15 minutes in length. So let's get started. Now, it all starts for us with participation rates science, which are at and time low. And it's not because of parents not being involved, career counsellors, students have too many choices. We've been trying to address these things over time without much success. We believe that a big issue with students not engaging with science is a lack of perceived relevance. Students are not perceiving the relevance of science to their lives when they're studying it at school, and as such are just not particularly interested in engaging with it, and then, you know, of course, are not pursuing it. Now, it's common practice when teaching science to do theory-led practice. So that's the sort of the idea of having the cart before the horse, where you would lead with formulas and then sort of drill and skill on formulas, and then potentially look at real life examples after that. So what's a driving pedagogy for us, Cosmos magazine, in our education program is what we call context-led learning, which, you know, in this analogy is putting the horse before the cart. So leading the learning with context, and then looking into the theory behind that once you've established why you're learning that particular thing. So let's just look at a couple of very simple examples of what I mean. So when students are learning Newton's laws of motion in Year 10, rather than learning about Newton's laws in, for example, looking at billiard balls on a table, you know, why not teach it in the context of, for example, the Google driverless car, something new, something, you know, naturally interesting to a lot of students, where, you know, you can look at velocity, friction, and so on. Another example, atoms and isotopes. You know, traditionally you might just dive straight into models of the atom. What's a proton? What's a neutron? What's an electron? Well, you know, why don't we lead that topic, engage students in that topic, first of all, looking at some interesting developments in electron beam imaging, or even more recently, neutron beam imaging. And as a final example here quickly, when learning about the digestive system, you know, to just dive into you know, some kind of model like this, where you're looking into the components and what they do. Why not lead with some kind of recent engaging story that has everything to do with the digestum? This image is in reference to an article in Cosmos magazine about the vulture's digestive system, and how its adapted digestive system enables it to eat dead meat, which of course kill most other creatures. So that's a very brief overview of what I mean by context-led learning. And now I'm going to shift focus across to our education program at Cosmos. So what I would like to do is Cosmos magazine. So Cosmos magazine, for those of you who don't know, is Australia's #1 science magazine. I'm just going to hop over to it now. So I've just hopped over to the Cosmos for Schools website, which, like I said, is our education program. And I'm just going to scroll down the page here and take magazine. And let's just view the latest issue here. So while that loads up, Cosmos magazine, like I said, is Australia's #1 science magazine. And what we saw at Cosmos is this fantastic opportunity. We're constantly publishing the latest discoveries, the most interesting discoveries, the most groundbreaking discoveries in science via the magazine. Why don't we use that to teach science, to produce lessons, these really interesting discoveries? And that's the basis of our education program, which we call Cosmos for Schools. So what I would like to do now is hop on into the lessons that we're using, and what that will take the form of is me guiding you through the lessons and constantly pointing out the features of the lesson in the context of the pedagogy that drives it. So for those of you who have joined who are already subscribed, you will, when you did receive an activation email, and I'll just quickly talk you through that process. So your activation email would have looked something like this. It has a link in here that allows you to click to activate. So I'm just going to click on that one. And I'll be taken through to Cosmos Content Partner Style, which is the e-learning app that powers Cosmos's lessons. I'm just going to sign up here. And I'll be away. So I'm just going to click go here. And I will arrive on a page that looks like this. So this is your home page when you're signed up to Cosmos. Produce every second week a new lesson for Year 7 or Year 8 or Year 9 or Year 10. And each lesson is based on a story in the magazine, which is what I'm about to show you. I'm just going to hop into Year 7 here. And then these are all of our science lessons for Year 7. So if I scroll down the page, I'll find a whole range of lessons that between them all cover the Year 7 curriculum. I'm just going to focus on the top one for now, which is called Invasive Species Peril. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how we've constructed these lessons and the reason behind them. So like I said, we lead every lesson with the context, which in this case is an article from Cosmos magazine on new research into eradication of feral cats. So if you look at introduction in the top left here, invasive species, and that's the story from the magazine. At the end of every lesson that we produce, we have a career profile. That career profile is on someone young doing interesting work in a related field. And then what's in between the introduction and the career is the real meat of the lesson that really hits those curriculum points for Year 7, gather, process, and apply, which is like the secondary pedagogy that we first one being context-led learning, and then the second one is this 3-tiered scaffolded learning that happens within the lesson. So gather is where students do lower order thinking tasks. They're really learning about the topic through videos, through text. Process, they're starting to build on their understanding and join the dots between, really start to reinforce it in their minds. And then apply will typically be either an experiment or a project on that topic. So I'm just going to dive in and show you what that looks like. I've clicked through to introduction, and in a moment this will load up. And the best way to show the lessons to you is actually as a student. So in the top right here, there's actually a student-teacher switch, which allows me to go in with my pretend student hat on. So I'm just going to do that, and I'll experience the lessons as a student would. It's just taking one moment, and here we are. Okay. So here's the story from the magazine. You can see Feral Peril. This right here, introduction, is actually the original Cosmos magazine article, rewritten by a journalist specifically for that year level. So the text is actually pitched at a level appropriate to that age group. So the students would start off by reading this, really sets the context for the lesson. And what follows that is actually the ability for the students to read the article in the magazine, should they wish to do so. Once they've done that, they'll get to the first question, which in this case, it really just sets the scene for the lesson. So we're talking about invasive species. in this particular case, imagine that you're a penguin and that you're about to move away from Antarctica. Which of the areas do you think you would thrive in most and why? The Sahara Desert, the Amazon forest, and so on. So I'm just going to pop my answer in here. And then move on. So I'm going to move on to the next section, Gather, where I'm actually going to start learning about invasive species. Okay. So here you'll actually find a mixture of resources available to the students to learn the topic. So to start off with, there's a little bit of an introduction. Why should we even be thinking about invasive species in the first place? And then what follows it is a video that just plays right on the page for the students. They don't need to download anything. They don't need to go to a new website. It's just there for them. And then as I continue through the lesson as a student, I'll find more questions, including true-false questions, multiple choice questions. And I'm just going to skip forward to a couple further below. We continue learning through videos, fill in the tables, and then question 6, where we're going to start looking at invasive species in the context of food webs, which is of course a part of the Year 7 curriculum. And here we've got an interactive question. So here we've got an existing food web with orchids, birds, and so on. Now what's going to happen if we introduce the brown tree snake into this food web? So the students would let the brown tree snake out of its cage, pop it in here, and then they would actually construct, using arrows, a new food web over the top, like that. So students would work their way through, they've read the article from the magazine, they're hopefully engaged with the context, and now they're that topic. So as the students are working their way through this lesson, of course, it's really important for teachers to be able to monitor their progress. So I'm just going to show you how that works now as well. So I'm going to go back up to the top, and I'm actually going to flick over to being a teacher. And as a teacher, you've got some additional controls that the students don't have. So you can see in the top right-hand side, I've actually got this classes page here, which is where I can enroll my students, which I'll get to in a second, and then a submissions page. And this is where I can actually see exactly where my students are up to. So if I click on the submissions page, while that's loading, what I'm going to see is down the left, the students that I've enrolled in, and across the top, all the work that I've set for them. Now, I haven't enrolled any students in here just yet, so you can see that there are no students just here on the left, but I'll show you in a second one that does have students in it. But I am actually in here as a teacher, so this is me. And if you have a look across, you can see under invasive species, in line with introduction and in line with gather are these two eye symbols. And that indicates to me as a teacher on introduction and gather. Yet process, apply, and career are blank, which indicates to me as a teacher that students not yet up to that. Now for either of these, I can actually click and be taken through to that student's copy of the work. So I'm just going to click here on introduction. And what I'll actually be taken is a copy of that student's work. I'll be able to see exactly where they're up to. So if I scroll down, there's my answer there on the Sahara Desert. I'm not, as a teacher, might not be sure about that, so I might say to the student, interesting answer. Justify your response. Sent back to the students. So you can see that not only do we have, do we lead with, I think it's powerful pedagogy, and this is feedback that we've been hearing from our schools, but a platform that wraps around it that backs it up so that not only is it easy for the students to do their work, but teachers can see the student work and provide them with real-time feedback to help guide them along the way. So that's just one example. I'll just show you now how to enroll students into the system, particularly for those who are enrolled with us today at the webinar. So I'm just going to hop over to a different screen here. I've just hopped over to a different copy where I do actually have students enrolled. So I'm just going to go back to that submissions page, and you'll actually see this is going to look much more like a real class. So I can actually see on the left here a whole range of students, and then across, if I scroll across, I can actually see there's there are a range of symbols here and a range of different progress that people are up to. So again, I can click through to see how each one of them are going. But what I'd like to do now is actually show you another part of the functionality of this system, which allows you to see a snapshot as a whole. So I want to know how my class B here is going as a whole on Gather for Invasives. I'm going to click this little blue icon here, and that's going to take me through to the Class Insights engine, which will show me on the top left here that 11 students are still working their way through, but 6 have handed it in to me as a teacher saying, I'm done, I'm ready for some feedback. On the right-hand side here, you can see something that's very interesting. So you'll remember that there were, at the beginning, question 2 was a true-false question. Question 3 was a multiple choice question. That as a teacher, I'm actually getting real-time analytics on how my students are going with those questions. So I can actually see, as indicated to me here by this long green bar, that students in my class did really well with questions. A little bit of red there, which means that someone, at least one person, got it wrong. So I'm actually going to delve into that because I want to know who that is. So I'm going to delve in and I can see indeed one person got that question wrong. I can actually click there and see that in this case, Colleen got that question wrong. So I can pull her aside and not interrupt the whole class and have a discussion with her about that. With question, say, 8, I can see that most of the class got it wrong. So I might want to have a bit of a quick look in there and see, okay, who are the people that potentially got it right? Let's have a look. So Emma, in this case, got it right. I might get Emma to volunteer for the class as to why she picked that answer. So that's, again, a bit more of a view of how the system works. And to enroll your students in the system, in the top right, again, I'm just going to click on classes here. And this will give me a couple of different ways of enrolling my students. So to enroll my students, all you have to do is to give them this invitation code, which will be unique to you. So KA54ES is the one for this one. And the students would log onto Style app, which is in the top right here. I'll actually send you all a link to this if you want as a reference. And that's the invitation code. Or alternatively, what you do is enter the student email addresses into this box underneath, click Add Students, and that will send them an activation email. So I'll do an example here, daniel@cosmosschool.com. I'm just going to add them as a student, and that will send an activation email to that student. So that's a very brief our lessons. Just to quickly recap on that, of course, so every single lesson that we produce, and it's important to us that the context stays up to date. So every lesson that we produce is based on a recent article in Cosmos magazine, and we produce lessons every 2 weeks and are also going back and update to new stories. So the context is always relevant to the students. And then to back that up, a 3-tiered pedagogy that builds student understanding from lower order thinking questions through to higher order thinking questions, and always round off lessons with a career profile, just to show students some of the possibilities around science and their potential careers. So that means not just showing people working in labs, but also showing people working, for example, doing science reporting, science journalism, science teaching, any sort of the areas that wrapping that visible to the students. All lessons come with model answers and printable handouts as well. Now, the final point that I wanted to make on the lessons, I'm just going to switch back to cosmosforschools.com because you'll find something very helpful there. So I'm just going to go back to cosmosforschools.com. So this is where we left earlier. Now, what I can actually see in my menu here in the top, Browse Lessons, and this is actually a very handy tool for subscribed teachers. So I'm just going to click on Browse Lessons. and that's going to scroll me down to our interactive lesson table. So here are actually listed all of the lessons that Cosmos has produced, and of course it's updated as new lessons are released. And what this allows me to do is to pick my curriculum. So we support international curricula, and for those of you who are International Baccalaureate, the IBMYP Middle Years program is mapped in there as well. I'm going to pick the Australian curriculum for now. And what I'm actually going to do is do a search for a keyword so I can find a lesson that I want to. So I might potentially search for atoms. So there's my search, and I can actually see that there are 6 lessons there that Cosmos has on atoms, some for Year 9, some for Year 10. Maybe I'm interested in this one, number 59, and I'll look inside. I can actually click to find out more information about that lesson, including the codes for that lesson, which of course are Australian curriculum. If I wanted to find out, for example, the codes for the New Zealand curriculum, I will just switch over, and now I can see for that same lesson the New Zealand curriculum codes. Okay, so that's enough from me about the Cosmos lessons. I'd like to hand it over to everyone that's watching. If you've got any questions for me, just type them into the chat box and fire away. So I have a question here from Michelle. How many lessons of 1 hour duration should each lesson take? That's a good question, Michelle, and that is one that comes up. So typically what I am over to the platform to use as a reference. Here we go. So here's that lesson on invasive species we had earlier. And what we typically see is that introduction, gather, and process makes up about 1 hour's worth, so 1 period's worth typically, and that apply and career typically will be. Now, sometimes, of course, it will fluctuate a little bit with the group of students that you have. But the other thing that's worth mentioning is that the platform that powers the lessons, Style, is accessible to students no matter where they are. So if they are at home, they would be able to log on and actually complete the rest of lessons, picking up exactly where they left off in the classroom to finish it off for homework. So you do have that option there. So Michelle, I'd probably say maybe 3 typical periods worth at a school. The next question I'm just going to read here from Patricia. So when enrolling students with the invitation codes, would it give me 2 codes if I have? That's a good question as well. So I'm just going to hop back over to the platform to answer that question. So I'm just going to go to my classes page here. And the way that this is set up by default is that you've got your one class called students. You can see here that underneath I can click add class. So if you say, for example, have 2 Year 7 classes, you can have class B and the other one, which here is called students. So I might actually rename that to class A. And now I've got my 2 groups. Now, to answer your question, you can see class A has this invitation Q88S, and class B actually does indeed have its own invitation code. So when students join in, they would be added to the class that's relevant to them. Braden has a question, so about the edited versions of the lessons that we can create from your Cosmos lesson. Can they be stored, and where do we find them? That's a really good question, Braden, and that's actually something as well. So I'm just going to hop back over to the platform. I'm going to hop back into my invasive species lesson and show you guys some of the additional functionality that you have with Cosmos. So one of the features that teachers report back to us as feedback that they really like about the lesson, the ability to edit them. So I'm just going to hop into introduction that we were looking at before, where we've got leading off with our story, and then there was that question on imagine that you're a penguin and you were leaving Antarctica. Now let's just say that that stimulated a really interesting discussion in the classroom, and I wanted to add another question off the back of that that seemed really relevant to my students. I can actually do that. So you'll actually see that as a teacher, is what we call this little widget selector, which allows you to add new content and new questions to the lesson. And this is unique to me. So as a teacher at a school, this is my account, this is my version of the lessons. I can actually modify them. So I'm just going to click on text and go written items. Just say, do some research and list 5 invasive species below. Click done. And now that has been added to my copy of the lesson. Now, to answer Braden's question, yes, that's right. So I've got now this new edited version, and let's just say that I wanted to share my edited version of the lesson with one of my colleagues at my school. I can do that. So I'm just going to go back to get the overview of the whole lesson. So this is my modified version of invasive species. What I can actually do in the top right of this black bar is this More button. I'm going to click More, and then you can see underneath it there's this option here, Share to Library. So if I click Share to Library, what that's going to do is going to take a version of the lesson and make that available to my school's library. So anyone now at my school will be able to use my edited version of the lesson. So for them, what they would need to do is actually at the bottom of this page. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom, and you can see here that there's this button, this blue button here on the right, Add Lesson from Library. So if I click Add Lesson from Library, that will actually open up the library panel on the left. And then this school here is called Cosmos Webinar in Year 7. And there is my editor, the author, Daniel Pickler, that's me. You can actually add a copy of that lesson in, and now in this case I've got a second copy, but if it were my colleague, they would be able to use my edited version of the lesson. No worries, Braden. So moving on, Philip, if you update the reference material regularly, do you archive older courses so teachers can refer to them? It would be easier for them to use a course they have used previously. Yeah, that's a really good question, Philip. So the way that it do use an older lesson, or you do modify an older lesson and you want to use that the following year, you will be able to. So what you can actually do in the system is archive this year's work with all of the student information in it, so their responses. And then what you can do is copy from your archive back a fresh copy of that lesson, keeping all of your modifications. To quickly show you, again, hopping back into the platform, I'm going to go back to my home page. So let's just say that I want to archive my Year 8 course. I'm just going to click on Year 8. And in this time in the very top right, in the green More button, there's this option underneath the subject. So I can archive my subject. That will keep it in a special archive for future reference, which the students will be able to see as well, which has, again, all of my modifications in it. And then what I can do is, again, via the library, pull back in my modified copy of the lesson. Patricia just had a follow-up questions. Are those classes now kept forever so that you can use a different lesson later? Yeah, that's right, Patricia. So for any staff member or student in the system, that you will keep access to your lessons forever. So you'll always be able to log back on, see all of your lessons that you've taught, as the students see all of the lessons that you've been enrolled in, all of your work, all of the teacher feedback, that's stored there forever. No worries at all. Looks like we might have another question from Braden. An archived lesson could then be duplicated and modified without changing the original. Yes, that's correct, Braden. You can keep that copy, duplicate that copy and modify it, and the original will stay as you left it. We have a question here from Glenda. Did I show how to enroll class? Yes, we did do that. So you'll get a recording of the webinar and you'll be able to see how to do that. Like it for questions. So the last thing that I'll leave you with is back on our Cosmos for Schools page where you can find the lessons. You'll also find more information for those of you who are not subscribed, including feedback from teachers. Like I was saying, the most positive feedback that we keep getting over and over is that link to the recent news does really help to engage the students in the topic, and that backed with an intuitive, interactive form really helps draw the students into their curriculum content. So you can see some feedback from teachers on our website, and then below that, further information about signing up your school, should you be interested. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and I will send you a follow-up email with a link to the recording from today. Okay, have a great afternoon. Bye.